this was such a deep pleasure for me to see, especially because Xinyan and I realized we've been talking about this film together for 6 years, and it premiered last spring at the Tribeca Film Festival, and I couldn't come because I had COVID and I was stuck in Rome. So, you know, just having seen it on my laptop in so many different versions, it was really a joy to see it on the full screen like this. So, congratulations. I wanted to, one thing that I realized when we were talking earlier is that I think when we first started to talk about this, I don't remember ever asking you how the origins of this film came about. How did you decide that you wanted to make this film? And what were the questions that were on your mind when you started?
Well, I think for both of us, we'd both been journalists in China. I was there for 10 years. Xinyan's obviously from China. And for me, at least, a lot of what I was telling stories about while I was there were related in one way or another to industrialization, to urbanization, and that kind of, those two big themes tied together a lot of the human stories that were fascinating and extraordinary about China at that time. And that was also, you know, around the time that China started to invest much more heavily in the global south, in Africa in particular. And Ethiopia had elected this development model, which was so similar to China's, and it was such a huge sort of a location for Chinese investment. And so it felt like a really interesting place to explore what the China model looked like in the global south as a whole, but also Ethiopia being so particular. So anyway, we teamed up and started looking at it.
Yeah, I remember the first time that I heard about what China was, a lot of Chinese companies are doing in Ethiopia was about the company Huajian, and it was making headlines back then with you know, catchy stories about workers singing 团结就是力量 in the morning, and this very militaristic management style, and several media got into this industry zone because it was pretty open to foreign media and making headlines, and so we're just really curious about what's going on behind the scene there.
I know from my own time as a reporter that sometimes, especially if you're working on a story over a long period of time, you know, like you have the topic, but what the story is changes in the reporting, and then it may change again in the telling, and maybe even again in the reception. And I just wonder, I mean, especially on a project like this that did take such a long time, and you know, and involved COVID and a civil war and all these things, how has your sense of what this film is about evolved?
Yeah, I think this film was our exploration beyond journalism. I think when we started the project, the inquiries that we had were a lot less sophisticated. I think we were just driven by curiosity about this Ethiopia being so active in following China's footsteps. So we were like, okay, what's going on? And we wanted to find out. But I think over time, the way we tell the story, the way we approach our characters, it all evolved a lot because of how long we were spending in the industry zone, and kind of reflecting also on our way of filming and the framing the characters, and you know, our positionality. The documentary industry was also shifting a lot during the past few years. So I think overall, so many things have changed during the making of this documentary. But in the end, we realized that the story is not just about China and Ethiopia. It was more about the future of humanity. There's still so many people in the global south still trying to chart their own path towards prosperity, and you know, of course, you know, China did not invent this state-led development model, but China did execute it pretty well. But that doesn't mean that model is going to take root successfully in other countries. So I think this film was more about what is the path to prosperity for these countries in the 21st century, and how do we develop in a way that's much more sustainable in the future.
I mean, it does, on whatever this is, 12th watching, it does come across as a cautionary tale. Is that?
Yeah, it's. I mean, what's also interesting, I feel, actually it gets a very strong reception from the academic crowd, because in many ways, I don't think we realized so much when we were making it, but it became such a case study of development. You know, we have all the different main players and stakeholders. You have the industry park, so you have the corporations, you have the local government, you have the workers, you have the farmers, you have all these different perspectives on industrialization. And I think it gave us an opportunity to sort of show that development is an incredibly complicated process, and it's not a one-size-fits-all thing that you can take and say, this worked for China in many ways, you know, let's put it on a different society, on a different moment in time, and expect that the same kind of thing will happen. And I think you know, if you see anything, I think it is a cautionary tale in some sense, because it shows that if, you know, you can't ask a country like Ethiopia not to industrialize, not to in some way or other take a developmental path like this, because one way or another, every developed country since the Industrial Revolution, Britain, has one way or another industrialized, right, in different interpretations of a similar kind of process. So you can't ask a country like Ethiopia not to walk that path, but the really important thing is that it's done properly. And you can see that if one of these different stakeholders, whether it's government or corporations, you know, isn't doing their bit, it can all fall apart. And in the end, the people who suffer are the people who development is purportedly supposed to benefit, who are the workers, the farmers, the people who are, you know, sort of down in the lower end of society, who are supposed to be being lifted up by this process, but often the people being lifted up are not them. Yeah.
I remember, in particular, you, Xinyan, really agonizing over whether the film was going to, you know, kind of replicate stereotypes about the kind of rapacious, capitalist, colonial streak of Chinese people investing, or whether it was going to wind up feeling too much like a counter-narrative that was then going to be seen as Pollyannish. And I wonder, I mean, I do think, you know, you've wound up with something that raises a lot of uncomfortable questions and doesn't offer really any easy answers. I mean, I guess the local mayor really does come off as kind of a villain. But apart from that, you know, just talk about how you kind of got there, and were there things that, what were some of the editorial choices that you made to get there? Did that feel like a natural process, or did you have to kind of manipulate things to achieve that kind of balance?
Yeah, I think we're very vigilant of the tropes that are out there. You know, we often joke that there are only 3 kinds of China reporting. There's big China, weird China, or bad China. There's just not much beyond that. So, I mean, having worked in China, I think we're so used to seeing some of the reporting that's pretty black and white. So now we have a great opportunity to, you know, 1 hour and a half. We really wanted to bring the complexity of the story, of the characters into the film. Yes, there are so many creative struggles, and you know, working with 3 different editors was part of them. You know, we had some Danish funding, and working with a Danish editor was a pretty big challenge. You know, we had to explain many of the scenes, even working with cow down with Walking Ash's hands. I was like, well, my grandma grew up with this, but we had to explain to him that this is what she was doing. And he was telling us, oh, no, you have to explain to our audiences what she was doing. And the parade, to me, it was so obvious that it was a national parade, the pride of Ethiopia, you know, the celebration of religion. But for him, he was asking us questions about all these scenes that are so intuitive to us. But it was interesting because he also brought another perspective that we did not have, and we added so many little details in the film to help people who have no idea what was going on in China and Ethiopia, to help them bring them into the story. So in the end, the film...
Like what's an example of something?
Well, for example, the parade. We had a big argument with our Danish editor because he's like, oh, in Denmark, people only go on the streets when they're celebrating football. And so I was like, okay, how can we make that part of the world understand better what they were doing? So we added this little voiceover from from Betty. She was like, oh, this is the epiphany. We're celebrating our religion, and now that we live in the factory, we celebrate with our friends. Things like that, small things that can help people understand. It's hard to make a documentary without being didactic. I think we're also very vigilant about that. Showing, not telling, a lot of things that I work a lot in broadcast journalism. A lot of times you try to fit your character into certain model to serve the purpose of the story, because usually we only have 3 minutes to tell the story. So I think in the end we also learned from making this film that the characters are not perfect. People's lives are not perfect. The story is not perfect. In the end, it's always so many different shades of gray.
No, the only thing I'd add to that, come back to our Danish editor, poor guy, is when we were discussing the role of Wakanesh, the farming character, he said, oh, but I really want to have the main character, the farming character should be opposing. And, we have this whole movement towards, to organic growing. And, I'm like, he was like, why can't the farming character be someone who's in full opposition to industrialization to balance the film? And we're like, well, the truth of the matter is she is not. She's conflicted, as many people are. And everybody in this process is both winning something and losing something in different quantities. And I think that was true in China, that was true in Industrial Revolution in Britain. You win something and you lose something simultaneously. Motto has done very well for herself, but what has she sacrificed? She sacrificed to some degree, her relationship with her daughter, who's on the other side of the world. Everybody is making a sacrifice. So it's really important not to make people into ciphers, because we know in real life that people are not, yeah.
Then again, Motto's comes out of the failure of this project in a she has far more options
of course.
than
of course.
Wakanesh or Betty.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That makes me wonder, I know you've shown the film in Ethiopia, you've shown it to audiences that include a lot of people from China, and I just wonder if it's possible to generalize at all, what the different reactions have been to the film from Ethiopians, from Chinese, and then from people who are maybe neither Ethiopian or Chinese. And maybe throw in, I assume the subjects have also seen the film.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting to hear what they made of it.
It was showing in Ethiopia was amazing, and we had a lot of this was a festival, the Ethiopian International Film Festival in May, and it was mostly Ethiopian audiences, but we also had a lot of Chinese, actually not that many actually, but some Chinese workers, people who are working in Ethiopia. But when we've shown it around the world, we get huge Chinese audiences and a lot of African diaspora audiences and Ethiopian diaspora as well. It's hard to sort of say. I feel like a through thread is that people appreciate that we've given every character and every stakeholder the option to really authentically express their motivation, rather than sort of, so they, whether you agree with them or not, you get to listen to why they are doing the thing they do. I think it's also interesting and sometimes in some way alarming to find that actually a lot of people still take away from it. They will have seen some complexity, but their overwhelming opinion might not have changed that much. If you look at, I spent quite a while looking at, we were on Arte, France and in Germany, and I was looking at the YouTube responses, and it was overwhelmingly very negative towards this mode of development, towards Chinese investment. And whereas if you show it to, I feel like we've shown it to Chinese audiences, they feel, yeah, this is how it is. Is it so bad? Obviously everybody has their own opinion. But so people actually still often take away what they already feel, because when you don't tell people how to think, they often, come away with the same conclusion. Not sure if that's a good thing.
What are we doing with our lives?
Yeah, but in May, we were able to put together this amazing private screening at the British Council. The British ambassador invited a few Chinese diplomats because it was done in a very discreet way. So it doesn't have to be public, but also representative from the African Union and also the Ethiopian Investment Commission. And to us, those are the perfect audience because we wanted the film to make impact on policies and that could help make changes in the future. And it was really interesting. It's also the first time that Moto joined our Q&A. And it was a bit nerve-wracking because we didn't really know how various, because the Ethiopian Investment Commission can also feel kind of offended by the film. But in the end, I think people they're not very comfortable, but I think they all felt that they've now for the first time seen the perspective from the other side. And then going forward to show it at the local cinema, a lot of the young Ethiopian audience really appreciated Moto, to our surprise, because she's kind of an enigma, and people take different things from.
The Guardian called her
her
excruciating to watch, which I thought was unfair.
But there's some people really love her. Like Ethiopians were like, oh, she's brave to challenge bureaucrats. Because for them, the frustration is the fact that they are not able to challenge that. And watching the film and seeing Moto do it, they really appreciated it. And having the three women on stage at the same time, it was the first time they had a conversation with each other. And many people also appreciated Wakinesh because they were basically, her life was very similar to their mom's life. And Robot was also very reminiscent of people that they knew, but never had a voice.
At the very beginning of the film, Mato is leading another Chinese man through the factory floor, and he says, "Oh, this is just like us 20 years ago, 20 years ago. And she says, yeah, they're just like us. And, there are, that's obviously it's a simplistic view, and, you can sort of hear the extent to which a lot of the Chinese people in the film have kind of internalized this very narrow definition of development and its virtues. And I just wonder, we've all spent time reporting on in China in factories during the kind of throes of its economic growth in the early 2000s, 2010s, and there do seem to be parallels in terms of the young women workers' aspirations, the problems of corruption, the problems of land displacement. I just wonder, how those parallels how you experience those parallels and the things that were very much not parallels as you were making the film, and how do you think about that?
I mean, I personally feel so conflicted about development because I feel like my generation of people really benefited from the hard work of our parents' generation. My parents worked in the steel factory for 30 years because I feel like my parents' generation really bought into this promise of prosperity. And growing up, you hear all these slogans like 先污染后治理, you pollute first and then you treat the environment later, or let some people get rich first and meaning other people will be left behind. These very ruthless development philosophy that's ingrained in your heads, and knowing that the sacrifices you're making, you're probably not going to enjoy the benefits of it in your lifetime. However, your children might. So I think Chinese people are perpetually living in the future, and part of, I feel like, why Moto is so driven is really by the fear of scarcity and the fear of falling behind. That I think every person growing up in China probably has a little bit of Moto in ourselves. And not being able to really stop and enjoy because you're just always afraid of falling behind. I think she doesn't even realize that, but that I think, at least what I see in her. I think for Ethiopian it's the opposite. I think they don't really see their future being guaranteed because there's no infrastructure to protect it. And it's so easy for Chinese to criticize them for not wanting to do overtime, but the reality on the ground is that they, however much more they make, it's not going to stick because it's hard to save money because of the currency. It fluctuates so much. You might as well just spend it all this month, because if you save it, it's going to be worth less next month.
Are they getting paid in U.S. dollars, or
No,
they're
in
just? But it's
in
just
birr.
they're giving the equivalent in U.S. dollars when they talk about it. Got it.
Yeah, but it's the birr is very the rate is really not great, and it's linked to the economy situation a lot, and they're not motivated, and like Wakinesh, a lot of these people in the process of development feel like the sacrifices they're making are not really helping them see the benefits of or the distribution of the benefits.
I want to give the audience time to ask some questions, but I just thought before we do, could you tell us a little bit about where the main characters are now? What are they doing?
Yeah,
and what's happening with phase 2?
So we're in touch with all of them. We're speaking to Betty and Wakinesh more regularly, especially Wakinesh, because we're now trying to find a way to help robots education going forward. So we've been talking about that quite a bit. And Betty, so Wakinesh...
She's how old now?
She's 13, just turning 13. And so I realized one thing is that the version you just watched, actually, because it's the digital cinema package, in the broadcast version, we've updated the status of Wakinesh at the end because their family has received their replacement land. I don't think that's in this version, but they're still waiting on some financial compensation for their farmhouse. So they still haven't received the full thing. They're still not going. And because of the economic situation, basically, nobody is pushing very hard on phase 2 because there are no new investors to move into it. So it's for the moment, it's a bit of a white elephant. Whether it will come into action at some point in the coming years remains to be seen. A lot of the Chinese investors are holding on, but the economy is bad and things are not going well. So it sort of depends how long they will hold on. I think it's this constant instability in Ethiopia that basically prevents more investors from feeling like their investment is secure, right? Motto's still there. She got a pilot license. She climbed Kilimanjaro 3 times. The third time was to take the ambassador's son, so she's working her politics. She's running her coffee business. She's actually part-timing at the industrial park again. So she's got her fingers in lots of pies, and she's not planning on going back to China. But after COVID, like her daughter's been spending more time in Ethiopia now that the restrictions have eased on travel, and she's a little bit older. So that's good. Betty left.
Say it just a tiny bit more about that. I mean, does she really? She says she feels at home in Ethiopia. She's lived there for a long time. Yeah. How genuine is that?
It's her USP. It's her unique selling point. We talked about this, right? We asked her, and it was like, she says, if I went back to China, I'm just, another Joe. Like here in Ethiopia, that's where her capital is. That's like where her connections are. That's where she excels, her experience. She's spent a lot of time building a life there. So if she goes back to China, she feels like, she's just like anybody else, which is sort of understandable. We've also met a lot of white people in China who,
I was just going to say there are some historical antecedents to this pattern.
Less said the better. And you've been speaking to Betty, right?
Yeah, Betty has, she's grown so much. Last time we met her, she speaks pretty good English. And like many other people, have become very disappointed with Ethiopia. It's really sad. I feel like people are so proud of the nation. But recently, even from Edie, the translator, he's like in love with how the Chinese do their business. But recently when we met him, he's like, how can I get to America? So people, I think, because the current administration, they really do not like what's going on, the corruption that's going on. And a lot of people have expressed to us, including Betty, that they really want to leave the country. So but she's definitely climbed the ladder a bit. Now she's kind of going back and forth between Addis and the industry zone, trying to do more sales. So she's much more active, no longer working on the factory floor. So she's already improved a lot in her ability to communicate with more people who are more sophisticated, and she's grown a lot. She's definitely a grown woman now.
And is she a major outlier, or were there other factory workers that you met who have also worked their way out of factory work?
So this is a problem with the factory. Women, the vast majority of the workforce are women, but it's extremely hard for them to rise above their positions for various reasons. You know, the factory itself, the industry zone itself is a very patriarchal system. The Chinese perpetuated the patriarchal system. A lot of workers call their managers baba. It's very common. And the Chinese managers also like hiring men to manage the women. Zhang Huarong, the boss of Huajian, the shoe factory, famously adopted 10 godsons and brought them to China to train and called each of them a name of the Chinese city, like Guangzhou, Shanghai. But none of them are goddaughters. And so we talked to Betty a lot about how difficult it is for women to really escape the system. And out of all the translators who trained themselves, only one was Nana, you see in the film, was woman. You know, they have so many more family duties, and they couldn't get off enough time early enough to attend night school. There's so various reasons, and also women tend to, this is what Betty told us, women tend to isolate other women who are leading the team. So for various reasons, it's been really hard. So none of the Betty's other friends really had a chance to come out of the system. In fact, they tried to leave, and various times they had to come back because the opportunities out there are not enough to sustain their lives.
All right, maybe we can start to take some questions from all of you. If you could just, I think there are handheld mics coming around, so just wait until somebody gives you a microphone. I will call on you and then get a microphone, and then you can ask your question. But I guess we can start right here.
I want to ask a question about technical change. These rock-bottom wage jobs are the classic ways in which Asian countries have gotten their start in industrialization. Are investors or governments or anybody worried about whether these jobs are going to be made obsolete by technical change in these various industries? And is there thought about increasing productivity as it goes along? Even, so the broader question is whether this kind of job, if you scale it up and if things work properly, would create enough jobs in principle to deal with the increased population and the need for more jobs.
I think in answer to the second part of your question, that was the plan. Absolutely, was to do China. And if you look at the Ethiopia's industrial strategy from the beginning, laid out by Meles Zenawi, who was the prime minister from the 90s, the plan was very much transport corridors, infrastructure, linking these big industrial parks, creating jobs for hundreds of thousands of people. Because at the moment, still, this kind of manufacturing still is a tiny part of Ethiopia's economy. I think they're still sort of 80–90% agrarian or something like that. So the plan very much was this was a big part of the whole nation's transition. This industrial park was the first, but it's certainly not as sort of a freak occurrence. It's a model for all of the other ones. But what we've seen because of everything that's happened is that most of these industrial parks are pretty empty. I went to one on another job unrelated to this film, where they happened to be storing, actually, the only thing that was happening in the Chinese-built industrial park was they were storing sacks of US aid that now wouldn't be there. So I think that as a model has not unfolded in Ethiopia, and I don't think it's unfolded actually that widely elsewhere in Africa. Perhaps Rwanda is a bright spot for manufacturing, but in terms of your question about whether this is sort of leading to, I think, leading to meaningful prosperity for the. Oh no, you were asking about automation. Sorry, I haven't heard about people talking about automating industry in Ethiopia, because in a way it defeats the point of being in Ethiopia, where the big draw is the cheap labor, and that's what the government has sold Ethiopia as an investment destination as. And this is a big part of what's the problems here that you can see in the film, in the strike scene, particularly when the workers down their tools, is Ethiopia doesn't have a minimum wage for private sector. It has a minimum wage for the public sector, but not the private sector. There is a base salary in the industrial zone, but it's very low. The Ethiopian government has resisted calls for a private sector minimum wage for a very, very long time because precisely they don't want to lose their strategic advantage, which is cheap labor. Same with unions. Unions aren't allowed inside the industrial park. That's the choice of the park. But to some degree, the government isn't doing anything to encourage them to allow unions in or allow the International Labour Organization to come in. So yeah, in terms of mechanization, I haven't heard very much about mechanizing in Ethiopia in a huge way.
I had a couple questions, or really just two, on some of your authorial choices and what themes you chose to emphasize or not. And the first is that around sort of the idea of the culture clash and of the different expectations between the Chinese and Ethiopians. And so I think, for instance, of a similar film, documentary into Spain, Empire of Dust, which very much emphasizes the culture clash. And you have the Congolese and the Chinese, and the Chinese were constantly beating up the Chinese, and the Congolese were saying that the Chinese had unrealistic expectations of them. But you don't quite do that here. It's obviously there is that dissonance, there is that discord, and I'm curious to what extent you consciously or unconsciously chose to emphasize that or de-emphasize that. And the sort of second is very briefly around the issue of identity and ethnicity, which, since you, of course, having been in Ethiopia, you'll know that this is in many cases the main motivating factor around these conflicts. But you don't really address it directly. I mean, we see a little bit of it. You show the Oromo religious ceremony and you see Orthodox ceremony, but you don't quite address it head on. I'm curious to what extent, again, that was a conscious choice, or maybe that was just not too many factors, too many layers, or maybe it was conscious why you chose not to do that. Thank you.
I think I watched Emperor of Dust, and I kind of took issue because it was kind of obvious that the filmmaker did not understand either side of the language. This is very common in some of the filmmaking in Africa and in China. I think a lot of the filmmakers, I think when we went to Ethiopia, we were very conscious of the fact that we were outsiders and that this is two ancient civilizations that have so much pride, and the people, it takes so much to win their trust. I think we really came in wanting to not extract those stories and make it a simple black and white story about one hating each other. I feel like we kind of took an anthropological method because we filmed 500 hours, and there are so many different aspects. There were people catching thieves, and there are people doing exorcism, and in the end, the stuff that we chose was kind of, there were so many different things that inspire people to think about why these stereotypes or racism against each other exist. I personally wanted to know, why are the Chinese people always saying, oh, they're so lazy? And why the Ethiopians are always saying, oh, the Chinese only know how to working, they don't love their family, and then they work so hard. These stereotypes, I think we hope that the film gives you some idea of where they're coming from. I think that hopefully this film is not just merely pitting people against each other. What was the second question?
The ethnic.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. So yes, that's also, of course, ethnic conflicts are what's driven the war, and so many people have died. In this particular industry zone, very similarly to China, they had a labor transfer program. So most of the workers are actually all from Oromia. So not so much ethnic conflicts were really seen in the industry zone. So it was, of course, very important. We decided the Civil War was included, but we couldn't really go much deeper into it because the film has already packed in so much. And of course, the whole Tigray War is extremely complicated, and bringing that in because I think in the end, COVID and the war were two very important major external events. But even if the COVID and Civil War did not happen, all of these development problems still will exist. So I think in the end, we wanted to make a film that's evergreen, that is not tied to any kind of contemporary issue, because the conflicts still stand 10 years from now, even without the war or COVID. So that explains why we decided to just mention it, but hoping people will be curious enough to do more research on it, but not to make the film about the ethnic conflicts.
Great documentary. My name is Philip, economic advisor from Ghana, and thank you so much for this. But I think the war and COVID really sort of affect the narrative quite a bit. And frankly, I think a good area where you could think about Africa and China collaboration going forward, which probably would make an intriguing idea for a sequel to this, I think would be around renewable energy and thinking about how renewable energy can really drive industrialization for Africa. So much of the thinking is that Africa has about 40% of global sort of solar radiation available. But all the installed solar capacity in Africa now is just 1%. In fact, if you go to Shandong province in China, go through Weifang, Binju, Qingdao, wherever, you see all these panels on the rooftops, on the hillsides, on the water, on the lakes, wherever. And that energy is critical for industrialization. So if in the past it was really one driven by labor costs, I think increasingly it's going to be driven by energy costs. And whoever has that energy and has it cheap can then motor through and power their industrialization very, very well. You go to Ethiopia now, 2-3 months ago, so even in Hawassa Industrial Park south of here, the guys have started building solar panels, and good for them. And I hope they do it, and they do it very fast. Even in Addis, down on the streets of Addis, you'd see BYD cars, you see Zika cars. It is stunning. And you're looking at it and you're like, something could be happening here. And I think that sort of narrative of maybe the model is not the China model, the old model, state-led model. No, it's a green model. And if you have the energy, you have the people, you have the panels, and you do it, you probably have a good shot at it. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anybody else?
What do you think about sort of the green model, as a green industrial model, as sort of the way forward on this?
Thanks.
Yeah, no, the only thing I'm not an expert on it, but I would anecdotally, it was interesting when we went back in May to Ethiopia, you saw a lot of EVs on the streets, and the majority of them were Chinese. And Ethiopia is the first country in the whole world to ban the import of fuel cars. And everyone's like, that is really extreme because car ownership is at like 1%. But China is a big part of the solution because Chinese companies have made a fully electric sedan for $10,000. Like, whose car are you going to buy? The solar panels are cheap, the wind turbines are cheap, and they're increasingly matching the quality of German products at a third of the price, right? So China is a huge part of that solution, this idea of leapfrogging, right? Totally. If they can, and I think this is where China is a big part of the solution. Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, can we?
Sorry.
Right up.
I wanted to say there could be more cautionary tales in the mining industry, though, for batteries, because Congo, Liberia, China just did a huge geological survey for Liberia, finding a lot of lithium, and I think that's maybe the other side of the new energy story.
Okay. Carlene, thank you for your time. I sort of had a two-part question. One was, I really enjoyed your choice to center Motto as one of the characters in the story, and wanted to know if you could share or had context on how Motto ended up in Ethiopia. And then the second part of the question was, if in your time, the years that you spent telling the story, recording it, if you found Motto's story to be kind of an exception, people from outside of Ethiopia who are very invested in its success, or if you saw other characters, other people who also felt similarly. You said it was a USP, but I'd like to believe that there was some genuine care, or that Motto felt for Ethiopia and staying there in its development and its story.
Moto actually first started in Tanzania, and she spent over 10 years, or was it Tanzania? Yeah, Tanzania. No, maybe not 10 years, but she actually did not share much of her early story. For a very long time, we're trying to get more of her vulnerable side and wanting to sit down with her to talk more, but she's actually quite protective of her past. But we do know that she came with her husband, and then her husband left her, or she left her husband. We don't really know what happened in there. But yeah, so she moved from Ethiopia, from Tanzania. She was in tourism before she joined the industry zone. I think that she's very different from most of the Chinese diaspora in Ethiopia. Most of them are also workers in these Chinese factories, so not so much education, and very rarely speaks the local language. So Moto, in the rare case, she speaks Amharic, she speaks good English, she speaks some Oromifa as well, the local regional language. Most of the Chinese workers keep to themselves, and this is why they hired Moto, because she was such a good PR person for the industry zone. But we do see a lot of mingling between the Chinese and, at the beginning of the film, we captured, actually, this is not the only wedding that we captured, but there were several couples that were in the industry zone, and two of them were having weddings, and we were very curious documenting these weddings, because there's something sweet, something awkward, something kind of inappropriate, something kind of, you can't quite pinpoint it. So we felt like that was sort of like a symbolism between the relationship between China and Ethiopia, because in the marriage, other people want to get into a marriage, some people want to get out of the marriage, and it's always up to yourself. I mean, you only know whether you're having a happy marriage or not.
No, the only thing I'd add about Moto is, I mean, it's generous of you to say that you appreciated that we followed her, but frankly, it was a no-brainer. I mean, we walked into her office and we're just like, wow, immediately you could see. And she was very, very keen to be filmed. And she's very well known in Ethiopia, where they call her like Aisai or something like that, sister number one. She's like sister number one in Ethiopia. And when it's very hard to sell a film like this. If you say, okay, it's a film about Chinese in Ethiopia, people are like, okay, that sounds like a long way away, with two cultures I don't know very much about. But we managed to bring on Dogworth, who's a great sales agent, and we said to one of them, like, out of interest, what do you like about our film? And they said, the dress. The dress basically sold the film, because it was just such an extraordinary kind of metaphor that's also fun. You need to find a way to pull people into remote subjects, right? And Moto is that person. I mean, she's just amazing. She as a character, as a subject. Yeah.
I had a few making of questions. What was the total time span that your filming covered? You said you had 500 hours, which I admire you as the editor of going through all that footage. And also, I'd love to know more about the casting process. You've spoken about Moto, but the other characters, how did you, when you're just starting on a story, how do you decide who's going to help you tell it, and how did you find them, and whether others you followed that then their storylines didn't quite end up in the final film? Thank you.
I mean, we started in 2019, we did a research trip, and we filmed from 2019 to 2023, but there was a kind of a 1.5 year gap. You see, there was an 18 months moment where we basically started to edit the film, and then and to work out what we were missing also, and also we wanted that longitudinal approach, because in the end, development is about change. It's about time. You can't judge whether development has been successful or not without a period of time passing. I don't think we ever thought it'd be 4 years, but that's what it became. In terms of casting, I mean, Moto was obvious. Yeah, we knew that we wanted a female factory worker, because 80% of the garment workers are women, and so we basically went to one factory that we thought was interesting, and we walked up and down the line speaking to as many people as possible, and just sort of asking, are you interested in taking part in a film? And those who showed interest, we went out for a great big dinner with 10 young women and spoke to all of them, and Betty really kind of stood out. Yeah, you want to talk about Wakanesh, or shall I?
Yeah, Wakanesh also, she's always been a very dignified character, and she embodies so much these divided opinions and how progressive women are in rural Ethiopia. We were enamored with the kind of way she carries herself and how she wants to protect her daughters, and in a very interesting way, wanting her daughter to participate in industrialization. So her marriage was so representative of how the villagers feel conflicted about the arrival of industrialization and urbanization. So it was a no-brainer to choose Walking Ash. And she also just welcomed us with so much openness into her homes. Yeah.
Thanks so much for being here.